You stand at the pharmacy counter. The pharmacist scans a plastic bottle. The register displays a price that defies logic. You hand over an insurance card. The price drops, or perhaps it spikes. You assume the transaction involves three parties: you, the pharmacy, and the pharmaceutical company that manufactured the medicine. You are wrong. There is a ghost in the machine, a shadow entity standing between the laboratory and your bloodstream. They are called U.S. Pharmacy Benefit Managers, PBMs. Originally, they were hired as mere administrative clerks to process paper claims. Today, they are the undisputed architects of the American prescription drug market. The Federal Trade Commission reported that by 2023, just 6 of these companies handled more than 90% of all prescription claims in the United States. 90%. A near absolute bottleneck for the medicines keeping millions of Americans alive. Their stated purpose is noble. The Government Accountability Office documents their role. PBMs administer benefits, negotiate discounts, and fight to control skyrocketing prescription costs. They are the hired mercenaries of the health plans, deployed to battle greedy drug makers. Yet a glaring contradiction haunts the system. The deeper these intermediaries embed themselves in the supply chain, the higher the sticker prices seem to climb. Intermediaries hired to control prescription costs have built an empire on opaque rebates, aggressive spread pricing, and vertically integrated pharmacies. They extract wealth from the very friction they were hired to eliminate. They decide which drugs you are allowed to take. They decide which pharmacy is allowed to sell them to you. They dictate the margins of their competitors. This is not a glitch in the free market. It is a flawlessly designed economic mechanism. A mechanism that becomes rational only when you trace the hidden flow of money and realize that the cost control agent is paid a commission by the enemy. To understand the invisible cartel of medicine, you must look at how the American healthcare system built its own trap. In the late 1960s, prescription drug coverage was a novelty. Patients paid cash. Insurers reimbursed them later through a slow, agonizing paper trail. By the 1980s, the volume of claims threatened to bury insurance companies in administrative ash. They needed a specialized processor. Enter the Pharmacy Benefit Manager. In their infancy, PBMs were simply data switches. They issued plastic cards, routed electronic claims over telephone lines, and charged a tiny administrative fee per transaction. They were efficient. They were boring. But as the 1990s bled into the 2000s, pharmaceutical science exploded. Blockbuster drugs for cholesterol, depression, and diabetes hit the market. Drug manufacturers realized they held patents on human survival, and they priced their creations accordingly. Health insurers panicked. They watched their margins disintegrate under the weight of $1,000 pills. The insurers turned to their administrative clerks, the PBMs, and asked for a weapon. The PBMs forged the ultimate market weapon, the Formulary. The Formulary is a master list of drugs covered by an insurance plan. It is a VIP RUP line. If a drug is placed on Tier 1, patients pay a tiny copay, and the drug captures millions of users. If a drug is excluded from the formulary entirely, it effectively ceases to exist for that insured population. The PBMs realized they held the keys to market share. They approached the pharmaceutical manufacturers with a simple proposition. We control millions of patients. If you want your life-saving medication on our formulary, you must pay us a toll. They called this toll a rebate. The drug maker agrees to pay the PBM a percentage of the drug's list price every time a prescription is filled. In theory, this is bulk purchasing power at work. The PBM negotiates a discount and passes the savings back to the health plan, lowering premiums for everyone. The GAO documents this exact function, noting that PBMs do indeed negotiate massive rebates that affect drug pricing. But the true genius of the rebate mechanism lies in its opacity. The contracts between PBMs and drug makers are guarded as trade secrets. No one knows the exact size of the rebate. More importantly, the rebate is calculated as a percentage of the drug's sticker price. This creates a perverse, catastrophic incentive. If a drug maker offers a cheap generic pill for $10, a 10% rebate yields a single dollar. But if a drug maker prices a branded medication at $1,000, a 10% rebate yields $100. The PBM, acting as the gatekeeper, suddenly possesses a deep structural bias toward high-priced drugs. They begin to favor expensive medications that offer massive rebates over cheaper medications that offer no rebates at all. The manufacturer raises the list price to afford the rebate. The PBM collects the rebate and keeps a slice for itself. The cost control mechanism has mutated. The gatekeeper has discovered that the best way to profit from a toll booth is to encourage heavy traffic on a very expensive road. The rebate was only the first lever of extraction. The PBM soon realized that controlling the drug maker was merely half the equation. They also needed to control the pharmacy. When a patient hands a prescription to a pharmacist, the pharmacy dispenses the drug and bills the PBM. The PBM then turns around and bills the health plan or the employer. This creates a dual transaction. And in the dark space between those two transactions, the PBMs constructed a masterpiece of financial engineering known as spread pricing. Imagine a patient walking into an independent pharmacy in rural Ohio. They need a generic blood pressure medication. The pharmacist buys the drug from a wholesaler for $2. The pharmacist dispenses the pills and submits the claim to the PBM. The PBM's algorithm dictates the reimbursement rate. The PBM pays the pharmacy $3. The pharmacist makes a $1 gross profit, barely enough to cover the plastic bottle, the label, and the electricity to keep the lights on. But the transaction is not over. In a split second, the PBM transmits a separate bill to the patient's employer or the state Medicaid program. The PBM bills the plan $40 for the exact same generic drug. The plan pays the $40, the PBM pockets the $37 difference. This is the spread. The PBM did not manufacture the drug. The PBM did not ship the drug. The PBM did not counsel the patient or dispense the medication. The PBM simply processed the data and absorbed massive cash flow. State regulators began to notice the bleeding. Investigations revealed that PBMs were extracting hundreds of millions of dollars from taxpayer-funded Medicaid programs through spread pricing alone. The GAO independently documented these reimbursement arrangements, confirming that PBMs utilize spread pricing to generate revenue. When confronted, the PBMs do not apologize. They argue that spread pricing is a legitimate form of risk management. They claim they offer health plans a predictable, fixed cost for generic drugs, shielding the plan from day-to-day price volatility in the wholesale market. It is a brilliant defense, grounded in classic insurance theory. But the reality on the ground tells a different story. The PBMs control the reimbursement algorithms. They systematically underpay the dispensing pharmacy and overcharge the client. The independent pharmacist is trapped. They cannot negotiate the reimbursement rate. It is a take-it-or-leave-it contract. If the pharmacy refuses the contract, they lose access to every patient insured by that PBM. They lose their entire customer base overnight. The PBM holds the power of life and death over the local pharmacy, and the local pharmacy is slowly bleeding out. The spread pricing mechanism transforms the PBM from a neutral administrator into an apex predator, feeding on the margins of the very healthcare providers it claims to support. By the 2010s, the PBMs have mastered the rebate and perfected the spread, but their ambition demands more. They do not just want to manipulate the board, they want to own the board. The climax of this economic contradiction is total vertical integration. The FTC interim staff report exposes the architecture of this new empire. The PBMs stop operating as standalone administrative companies. They merge with the health insurers. They merge with the retail pharmacy chains. They build massive mail-order specialty pharmacies. The big three become monolithic behemoths, housed deep inside massive healthcare conglomerates. The walls between the payer, the manager, and the pharmacy completely dissolve. This concentration of power changes the fundamental nature of American healthcare. The PBM now dictates reimbursement rates to its own direct competitors. A fiercely independent pharmacy receives a new contract from a major PBM. The reimbursement rates for critical drugs are suddenly slashed below the actual cost of acquiring the medication. The
independent pharmacy loses money on every prescription it fills. The pharmacist calls the PBM to appeal. The appeal is denied.
The independent pharmacy is forced to turn patients away. The patient, desperate for their medication, receives a helpful letter in the mail from their health plan. The letter informs them that their local pharmacy is no longer in-network, or that it is simply cheaper to use the plan's preferred mail-order pharmacy. The preferred mail-order pharmacy is, of course, entirely owned by the PBM. The independent pharmacy goes bankrupt. The PBM captures the patient. The FTC documents this exact phenomenon, highlighting how vertical integration allows a small group of intermediaries to steer patients away from unaffiliated pharmacies and directly into their own corporate subsidiaries. The conflict of interest is staggering. The PBM is supposed to find the lowest possible price for the health plan. But when the PBM owns the pharmacy, its incentive is to steer the health plan's money into its own corporate pockets. They create specialty drug classifications. If a patient needs a complex medication, the PBM mandates that the drug can only be dispensed by their wholly owned specialty pharmacy.
The PBM then reimburses its own pharmacy at astronomical rates, draining the health plan's resources while enriching the parent company. When a cheaper generic version of a blockbuster drug finally hits the market, the system breaks entirely. Logic dictates the PBM should immediately switch patients to the cheap generic to save the health plan money. Instead, the PBM often blocks the generic. They exclude it from the formulary. Why? Because the manufacturer of the expensive brand name drug offers a massive rebate to maintain its monopoly. The PBM chooses the high-priced drug with the high rebate over the low-priced drug with no rebate. The cost control function documented by the GAO still exists on paper, but it has been weaponized. The PBMs argue they pass the majority of these rebates back to the health plans, helping to lower overall premiums. But the FTC staff analysis points to a darker reality. The sheer concentration of power means no one can independently verify the math. 6 companies process over 90% of the claims. This does not mean every single PBM contract raises every patient's price.
The FTC uses qualified language, noting the potential effects and the structural incentives. But the undeniable truth is that a small group of intermediaries now wields absolute influence over which medicines millions of Americans receive, which pharmacies are allowed to fill them, and how the massive financial burden is distributed. The saga of the pharmacy benefit manager forces a brutal reevaluation of how modern markets function. Economics traditionally assumes that intermediaries exist to reduce friction. A broker connects a buyer and a seller, takes a small transparent fee, and the market becomes more efficient. But the U.S. prescription drug payment chain proves that when an intermediary achieves total dominance, it no longer reduces friction. It manufactures friction, because friction is where the profit lives. The PBMs operate in a realm of artificial opacity. The true price of a drug is a deeply guarded secret, known only to the entity balancing the rebate, the spread, and the formulary fee. When intermediaries grow larger than the producers who make the goods and the distributors who deliver them, they stop servicing the market. They become the market. The paradox of the PBM is the paradox of all complex service economies. The entity hired to solve a crisis eventually requires the crisis to survive. If pharmaceutical companies suddenly lowered all their list prices to their true marginal cost, the rebate system would instantly collapse. The spread pricing margins would vanish. The massive leverage of the PBM would evaporate. The gatekeeper needs the high sticker price to justify the discount. We constructed an elaborate machine to fight high drug prices, and we chose to pay that machine with a percentage of the very prices it was supposed to destroy. The consequences are measured in boarded-up local pharmacies, exhausted state Medicaid budgets, and patients rationing medicine. The PBMs defend their empire by pointing to the billions they negotiate away from drug manufacturers. They are not entirely wrong, but a shield that demands your life savings is indistinguishable from a sword. The American healthcare system surrendered its pricing data to a handful of middlemen, assuming the invisible hand of the market would align their incentives with the patient's health. Instead, the middlemen built a labyrinth where all roads lead to their own ledger.
As the final independent pharmacies close their doors and vertical integration consumes the supply chain, a chilling reality sets in. Does the middleman still work for the patient, or has the patient simply become a captive asset to feed the middleman?